reminder that we love questions from the audience, so you can start commenting your questions now, or you can also add them as we go. I'll be right back on to welcome our guests to the show. Thanks for meeting us for coffee. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here to meet us for coffee today. And actually, my guest and I are both in Kansas City, but we realized too late that I failed to coordinate an in-person coffee meeting. But that's okay, because I'm actually a little bit under the weather today. So the good news for you guys is when I'm not feeling great and my throat's a little sore, I just let my guest do all the talking. So he's going to be sharing all the insights today. They're going to be coming from his side. But thank you guys for being here. I have a couple of announcements. We have a discount code already active for Manifest, which was in February of 2026. But the good thing about being early is it's never going to be cheaper than registering early. So this is currently one of the cheapest rates that they're going to have. And then we have a discount code that's coming live already. I'm going to get that in the comments of the show. I'll also probably just have it saved on my LinkedIn page somewhere if you ever need to come back and reference that. Journal of Commerce Inland Distribution is coming up too. That one is sooner. That's in, I think, September. And I'm going to be there. The podcast will probably be there. And we will have, there's still an early bird rate right now. I think that's about to expire. And then as soon as that does, if you miss that window, we're going to have a discount code coming on that one too, to help kind of extend that rate for you guys for a little bit longer. I think those are the only two announcements I have right now. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and bring on my guest, Mr. Frank Wurst. Frank, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Great to be here.
Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So Frank Wurst, I'm the Director of Logistics at Greif. I live in the Kansas City area. Sam, I actually recognize that coffee shop from your intro. I've been there with my family. I think we went to see Mariah Carey's Christmas special, and the next morning we went there. So that brought back memories. Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah. Real quick fun fact, I randomly picked the background for the Meet Me for Coffee, that sign, that glowing sign. I found it on Google. And then one day I was looking for like restaurants and like Instagram, I think. I was searching hashtag Kansas City. And I saw that sign and I was like, no way, it's actually here in Kansas City.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It is. And it's just coincidence that it worked out that way. So I was able to go shoot that footage at the coffee shop that I based this whole thing off of a year before I even knew it was here in Kansas
Pretty
City.
cool. Yeah. But yeah, I've been at Greif 2 years and 4 months, let's say. So, still relatively new in the journey there. I've been in supply chain or logistics my whole career. The football stadium behind me is Penn State. So I studied logistics back in the day, back in the mid 90s to date myself. Spent a lot of my early career in New Jersey. I worked for companies like American Standard and Church and Dwight and really just tried to gain some experience. And in 2016, I got an opportunity to move my family to Kansas City to work for Dairy Farmers of America, working on network optimization for them and warehousing. And after a few years doing that, they moved me to a logistics procurement role. And then the opportunity at Greif popped up. And I always say I think it was the first job I've ever applied for in my career that I was qualified for, if that makes sense. So I tried to do stretch assignments and then kind of all led me to this. So it's been a good ride.
Awesome. Well, we are, like we said, both in Kansas City. We have some people commenting. Guys, let us know where you're listening from. Also, Travis says he's not liking that Arrowhead background, which I think he missed your intro where you said it's Penn State, right? But
Yeah, that is still
um,
challenge. Yeah, but there's
I,
Chiefs up behind me, so there you
yeah,
go.
there I was going to say, I think we are Kansas City Chiefs fans, though. So, Travis, now you have to tell on yourself and tell us what team you like so we can all judge you silently and not so silently. But thank you guys for listening and being here this morning. Anyone else listening in, we'd love to know you're here so we can say hi. Okay, so Frank, 2 years in at Greif. I always wanted to say grief, but I'm
Yeah,
like,
just it rhymes with life. That's the
yes,
easy way to
rhymes with
remember.
life. It's
Yeah.
Greif. Okay. But you, like you said, you've been in supply chain for quite a while. So I want to learn more about that journey through several different supply chains. I always think it's cool when I get to talk to people who have experienced different types of supply chains and maybe some with more global footprints, maybe some more domestic, but you've no doubt experienced a lot across these various supply chains. So you kind of talk me through just what's changed in the last kind of 10 years as you've noticed, or what different maybe challenges have you been faced with or evolutions have taken place in the space from a shipper's perspective as you've gone throughout your career?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I mean, technology, that's such an easy answer, right? And that's changed leaps and bounds, and I'm sure we'll spend more time talking about that. But I think what really pops out to me, at least in, I'd say, more forward-thinking companies, is just supply chain and logistics has a seat at the table, and it's not an afterthought. So, it's the typical, I mean, right, when I started out of college, it's 25 years ago, things were just a lot different. I think companies are looking at, ways you can use transportation as, hey, if I want to have lower inventories, maybe I could spend more on transportation or use it as a hedge against certain risks, or I want to improve service there. So there's just, rather than just looking at it as an expense or a cost of doing business, saying, let's look at the whole supply chain and the gives and takes across inventory levels and transportation spend and forecasting accuracy, and really just evolve it and make it so it's actually part of the supply chain and not just a, kind of an afterthought. So I think that's the biggest change that I've seen.
Um, Good morning to Logan. Hi, Josh. Hi, Steven. Just want to say hi. But as you mentioned, like, it's not as much of an afterthought. When do you think you started to see that shift, and when did that more accelerate?
Yeah, I think for me, it was during my time at Church and Dwight. If people aren't familiar, that's a company that owns like the Arm& Hammer and OxyClean and Orange
Yeah.
Flow. So big CPG company, just very well run, high level of forecast accuracy, which actually made transportation sourcing a lot easier. And I think that was part of when I had the revelation of, oh my gosh, like if we have good data here and we can go to market and say, this is what's actually going to happen, these are our volumes, it really makes the job a lot easier, as opposed to, we don't know what's coming. We're going to be exposed to spot market. We're going to send out awards that are wildly inaccurate and have a reputation for doing that. So I think during that time, I always say that was just a very well-run supply chain. I learned a lot there. I really enjoyed my time there. I still keep in touch with people. It was so mature that I kind of was like, well, I think I need to make my own mark. And that's kind of, when I left and took the opportunity at DFA.
Yeah. And so you said like if we could have good data, then we could make better decisions essentially. And so that was kind of that's something that the market, I was selling probably around that time. I don't know
Okay.
exactly when that was, but that was the beginning of my years in sales, outside
Okay.
sales and as a provider. And everything was about like if we can be the person to provide good data to these customers through use of a new TMS system or through use, by providing internal data, because we're actually taking the time to dim all of their freight, in the LTL space and things like this. So there
Yeah.
was like this obsession over trying to help people get better data so they could start making better decisions and driving down cost. What have you observed, like what enabled shippers and still continues to enable? Because I think we're like getting better with data like continuously. But what type of technologies were kind of coming into play and are now in play that you think are helping to provide this better data push?
Yeah, I think one just outside of the technologies is like, I mean, you take it for granted, but everyone basically, I think large enterprise shippers is going to have a TMS, right? So just having a way to look at past data and pull stuff really quickly and tie it directly to your ERP. And I think outside of technology, just the process of having a seat at the table with the S&OP group, as they're doing planning, hey, what volumes are coming up. But I think it's actually good that you mentioned technology, and you mentioned Manifest earlier. I went out to Manifest this year on a mission to enhance Greif's technology in this space, because right now we're still using forecasts and history, but I'm kind of fully embracing these new novel technologies that are out there to help with our RFPs to say, can we do this more dynamically? And I think that's part of the difference, dynamic versus static, right? Static is pull a bunch of data, spend 3 months cleaning it, push out a bid from start to finish. It's 6 months, and then the rates are accurate or are in place for a year. So you're on like an 18-month timeline, as opposed to log into a system that bolts onto your TMS, push an RFP out in less than a week, and have it be much more fluid. So that's the end goal for us, is to get to that point.
Yeah. I have a question for you on the note of RFPs and kind of timing and things like that and this technology. I think some technology, better data in general, and then also just to me, just like what the market demands really kind of determines like RFP length. But we saw throughout the pandemic when everything was just so volatile that we were doing like 3-month, 6-month RFPs, sometimes even just like 1-month RFPs, like just trying to get some
Yeah.
level of stability, some measure of stability. I just saw an interesting post from a broker actually that said that they participated in a couple RFPs at the end of the year that have yet to fully implement and go live.
Yeah.
They think that it's not just that they can, it's that like maybe people are strategically at this point trying to actually stall and like lengthen out like existing relationships, not change routing guides. So how much of like RFPs and that is more like, hey, we have I guess like there's one part where it's like we have the capability to go at a certain speed, but then the other
Yeah.
part, like we have to read the market, we have to read our partnerships, and we just kind of have to use also like common sense to tell us when to act and when to stay.
Yeah, I think the RFP is kind of like, a means to an end, but like you nailed it. The relationship and understanding the market is huge, right? So on a lot of our freight, our objective is rates that are in place for, I'll say awards, that are in place for at least a year. In some cases, rates for a year, in some cases, rates for 6 months, right, with an annual award on volume. So we try to have some degree of flexibility to really tune into the market and what's going to give us the best chance of success.
Sure.
And then we even look at like on our dedicated fleets, right, longer awards, 3 to 5 years, right? So that's a lot more predictable. That's very attractive to a carrier.
Sure.
It's a balancing act of saying, in particular where I work now, a lot of our packaging goods are not the most expensive, right? So freight can be a huge, huge percentage of that.
Yeah.
So we have to look at really what is the best way, a mix of dedicated fleets versus one way. Right now, spot market is 40 cents a mile below contract, right? That's a DAT stat. That's not for us. So also we want to dip our toe in that a little bit. We don't want to be too exposed because it will flip at some point. Although I've been saying spot rates will flip now since I started at Greif, and I'm wrong every year. So
2 years. Yeah, we've been waiting on that flip for 2 years. Yes, that's right. I've been saying, most likely in 6 months, and then in 6 months we're like, nope, another 6 months. So yeah, spot on there. Well, I'm curious then. I think it sounds like most of what you do now at Greif being such a larger company with a a larger supply chain is happening in the full truckload space. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. Vast majority is full truckload, right? We're doing a lot of like steel drums, fiber drums, corrugate, things like that. So the order quantities tend to be full truckload.
Hmm. What do you think about I think one of the reasons I love the full truckload market is because I just feel like innovation and change can happen so fast here.
Yeah.
I came from an LTL
Mhm.
background, there's like warehousing, things like that. That takes a lot of like physical retail or storefront space, like space, lots of investment, heavy cash flow. And by nature, the truckload market is, we have lots of entrants, we have lots of exits, but it's not even
Yeah.
just on the provider side. Like I feel like the brokers and the carriers, there's so many smaller players that tend to be really quick at adapting new technologies, new practices, new techniques. And there's a lot of regulation in the space too that's always kind of changing that people are having to react quickly to. So I just feel
Yeah.
like it's been a really fun kind of dynamic space. How do you feel about that though, from like the shipper viewpoint?
Yeah. I agree 100%. Right. I think the thing that's very unique about the US truckload market is a couple 100,000 providers selling a service. It's not a commodity, it's a service because there's
Mhm.
differences across these carriers.
Absolutely.
And the switching costs are extremely low on both sides,
Hmm.
right? My top carrier could walk away tomorrow, or I could walk away from them, and either one of us could figure out a replacement rather quickly. So it's a very unique market, very relationship driven. You mentioned LTL and warehousing. They're a lot, especially warehousing. It's a lot stickier, right? The switching costs are enormous. So you sign a deal with someone, and after 3 or 5 years, it expires. If you get a lower rate with someone else, it'll probably cost you more to switch to them, right? So truckload fascinates me just because it really is, how do these carriers set themselves apart, and how do they make the relationship more sticky, because it's definitely challenging.
How do you balance that as a shipper, like the relationship piece with like so you guys are Greif is doing packaging and depending on the type of packaging, like you mentioned, I'm sure there's a plenty of your SKUs that are um, they're just not there's not tons of margin to play with there, right? When we're doing
Mhm.
loads of packaging. So price sensitivity has to be considered. You guys have to prioritize, keeping costs reasonable. But then, like you said, yeah, we could always be, changing or replacing if we had to, but nobody wants to have to always be making changes to their provider base because that becomes inefficient in and of itself. So how do you balance the like relationship piece, but also the price piece?
Yeah, I think you hear shipper of choice get thrown around a lot, but I think that's important, right? So I'd say our top strategic carriers would say that we, for the most part, are transparent with what we're trying to do. Um, we like to share data. We like to set what expectations are. Manage by fact. Here's your scorecard. What's your tender acceptance? Are you honoring your awards? What's your on time pickup, on time delivery?
Yeah.
The whole, you missed 3 pickups one week, you're my worst carrier. That's not how we do things. We look at, what's your 6 week performance? Are you hitting targets? And we're just very surgical about giving carriers transparent feedback so they know where they stand.
Mm.
So I think that helps. And then really, when we're looking at who do we want to work with, it's a three-legged stool. It's cost, service, and safety/compliance, right? They're all very important. A cheap freight rate that's a paper rate that comes with missed pickups or no capacity is meaningless. And the amount of times in my career I've had people say, let's go with the paper rate, you just got to use your experience and capacity commitments to say that's not a real rate and stick with what's real.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would like to also ask a little bit more about we mentioned your product, but I'd like to know a little bit more about like your industry and your space. Packaging is one that I mean, paper products more. Jason Miller talked a lot about them for like how much of that was offshored and like moved out of the US over the last 5 years or so. But there's a lot of packaging production that still happens here, and packaging
Mhm.
is like a top commodity for a lot of transportation providers. So can you just kind of talk to me a little bit more about the marketplace that you guys are serving and also what trends you've noticed in general as you guys are contracted or as your, volumes maybe change or the customer base that you have maybe changes? Do you get any type of, um, this is my economic side of me. Do you get any type of like sense for the market in general, because you guys are creating the packaging that goes into these other types of goods. So how are you able to kind of maybe have a little bit of an advantage to feel that out in the marketplace?
Yeah, definitely. You threw a lot at me there, but I'll do my best to keep up. So just keep me honest here. First of all, I'll say we have the numbers. The number changes right based on the year. There's a lot of things going on with our company, but it's around 122, I think, North American manufacturing sites right now, and it's very regional. So unlike a lot of companies that I've worked for, we have a shorter length of haul. I had mentioned dedicated, so we a lot of times have such a short length of haul that when you look at one-way rates, we're better off paying all miles and just having, drivers dedicated to our freight running out and back and maybe getting the occasional back haul. So I think that's one thing that's very different about the Greif business model for me is because there's so many locations and it's so regional, we really have to use a balance of, I'll say, national asset-based carriers, national brokers, and then niche regional asset-based carriers. And that third category is very important to us. We don't want to fall into the trap of just saying we need to do business with all of the big companies. There's a lot of local, smaller companies. If their footprint aligns with where our plants are at, we found that to be a really good fit. And I'll say I'm blessed because most of those carriers were brought on before my time here. So I just reap the benefits of having them in our network. So a shout out to the people before me at Greif.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Second part of the question.
Yep.
Do you feel like you can kind of tell, like, do you get any predictive indicators of the broader manufacturing market through like packaging orders, or is that?
Yeah. So I will say, we talked before about spot rates, right? And how they're still suppressed and contract rates have bottomed out. And at some point that has to flip, right? When that happens, my job will get harder, but that's okay. I have a great team. I've spent a lot of time investing in, and I'm not worried about when that happens because of, who we have here at Greif. So my job will get a little more hard, a little more stressful, but Greif's volumes will also pick up, right? Because we follow basically industrial production in the US.
Sure.
So when we start making more and the economy, the industrial economy picks up, I'll say, truckload rates will start to increase, spot rates will increase, and Greif's volumes will also increase. So part of me says, I look forward to when that happens, right? Because this rate cycle is unsustainable, and it's so cliche to keep talking about it, but it's to me, it's mind blowing how long it's been happening, and it's just every year my forecast is wrong, and we punt to the next. So, and I don't think anything's happening this year now, so it's probably 26 before there's relief.
Yeah. Curious, I was going to ask for your kind of thoughts on the outlook for the truckload market. If you had any observations, I'm sure we're all hearing a lot of the same sources, but what kind of makes you lean more towards 26 at this point? I mean, we're already in almost May, so.
Yeah, I think it's just right. I mean, 6 months ago, I would have said 25 is the year. And that was my guidance to Greif. I said, we really have to, I'll say, land the plane on our spot market usage. We're not going overboard, but we're strategically taking advantage of the spot market where we can to just help with our margins and help, drive some lower cost freight. But my prediction was halfway through 25, that honeymoon would be over. That's not happening. It's May. It's not going to change in a month. And there's still a 40-cent gap. So
Yeah.
I feel like just based on everything going on with the economy and depending on the day, the headlines are different and there's just so much uncertainty. I just think the uncertainty is going to just make things kind of sputter for a bit longer until we really figure out what's going on. So I would imagine that my best estimate would be that things will be pretty steady to the rest of this year. And then sometime in 26, there'll be a slight recovery for freight rates.
Might be speaking slightly out of turn here, but I think I just saw numbers already for April industrial manufacturing, and it was not good. So I think that's kind of like, like as you mentioned, you guys tend to follow that path, but most of freight also is dependent on U.S. industrial manufacturing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's the thing is even if, we get some type of stability or certainty back to the markets, we've paused tariffs until July, maybe people are making some changes. Maybe couple months to kind of really start to see those changes, and then we're into mid-year. And so, like you keep mentioning, like there's a 40-cent gap, and typically we don't see tightness in the market till that's completely converged on itself. So
Yeah, I check every week.
a lot can change. I know, and we saw bumps of upward momentum and then kind of back down, but I think we've been having those normal seasonality kind of bumps now. So would you say that you guys have at least been able to plan and forecast for that to kind of have a more normal seasonality come into play across your network?
Yeah, I think we've done well with that. I mean, we've surrounded ourselves with some really good carriers, right? And I don't want to get into the exact specifics, but when I started at Greif, there was just a lot of carriers, right? There was too many. And so we've spent a lot of time being more deliberate about who we want to work with. I mentioned the three categories that I put them in and saying, you know, which carriers fit into our network the best, because we want to be relevant, right? I mentioned back to the low switching costs. We need to be relevant with these carriers as well and have a decent amount of volume with them and have them understand, you know, what our strategy is so they can decide if they want to continue to haul our freight.
Yeah. Well, you know what I do for a living. You know, I coach sales and help companies sell better. And I think
Yeah,
I actually used to maybe solicit you when you were at Dairy Farmers of America. I was still in sales at the time
I
too. So
remember.
you know that I'm all about sales. But like you said, we have seen the last even up to maybe 5 years now. Well, ever since the pandemic and everyone went and added as much capacity as they could, and ever since that initial surge ended, people have been focusing on, for the most part, trying to reduce the number of transportation providers. Every supply chain has a different number of. That's just a fact. Like, you know, you guys are more regional. You have a lot of locations. You're going to need a different number of carrier partners
Yeah.
than someone with two major distribution centers and a different footprint. So everyone has that number in mind, or they kind of have figured that out maybe by now. But when thank you, Erica. I needed that.
Very kind.
I don't think Frank bought from me still, though. I don't remember, but
Uh,
um, when people are, I'd love to hear from you. Like, and this doesn't need to be like, oh, what this is what you write in a cold email, but like when people are soliciting you as a shipper, what is the mindset that you have? Like, I know you get solicited every day, probably multiple times a day, but what
yeah.
is the mindset that you take to like, are you always looking? Are you not looking? If you're looking maybe more passively, what is it that you're looking for? Like, what is that kind of shipper mentality that you think you guys keep when you're not necessarily actively onboarding providers?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'll just answer with a little bit of color here. So I oversee the operations group. I'll say the logistics admin group and the sourcing group, right? So I try to think very strategically about the best use of my time. And right now, a lot of my time is spent on internal Greif stakeholders, people in sales, manufacturing, across leadership, IT, just making sure that we're working well with them. And of course, obviously on my team. And I try to be less externally focused on potential new vendors. So I focus most of my time on incumbents, strategic incumbents sitting in on QBRs. My sourcing group will be a little more external focused than I am, although we still are in kind of carrier rationalization mode.
Sure.
So I guess the long story short, right? I wouldn't say that we're always looking, but you know, our eyes are open. But there has to be some type of connection. Like the sending an email saying you have 250 trucks is white noise. I mean, I treat most cold calls and emails like the same way I treat junk mail that comes to my house. Like I just don't have time. It wouldn't be fair to my team or my internal stakeholders if I spent all day chasing these down. I get dozens a day.
Yeah.
That being said, at some point we have to work with new carriers, right? Low switching costs, dynamic industry. So I think a lot of it is you know, meeting people. I'll say at like industry events where you get to know a little bit more about them. I place a lot of value on relationship. So I'll just use brokers as an example. A lot of the brokers we work with, I'll know like the CEO or the founder, and
Yeah.
that's the special sauce, right? If someone's just pinging me, trying to get a bunch of business, but doesn't really understand what our strategies are. And they're leading with sharing information, but they don't know anything about us. That's just the wrong approach.
Mhm. What would you say is like, so if someone was going to reach out, I think there's a balance between and this is an assumption, so I'm happy to be wrong. They need
Mm-hmm.
to show that they understand your business, but they also need to do it in a way that shows why that makes them the good fit, right? Like, so there has to be that balance between sharing that they understand your supply chain, but also telling you enough about themselves to say, like,
Yeah,
this is why it's a good fit. So I think I see a lot of like, here's everything about you. And it's like, great, like, you know, my business, you can Google, or it's like, hey, here's everything about me and what we do. And you're like, so I'm supposed to go like think through how that would relate to me, right? Like,
I know.
I feel like there's a middle ground there, but I would like your thoughts.
No, I think you're right. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's just, I mean, back to there's a couple 100,000 carriers, right? And I know it's tough on the carrier side. I get that. I've been doing this in some
Yeah.
respects my whole career. And I do have, I know it's a tough gig and it's a very vital industry
Sure.
for our country, right? But it's just, it can get overwhelming just being totally transparent with how many pings you're getting. Um, yeah, Matt Soloff is a soothing voice in a sea of noise, so I will give him credit there. I don't know if you saw that comment, but if you're ever stressed out, give that guy a call. He'll talk you off the ledge. But but I think too, yeah, we back to are our eyes always open? I think they are. It's just a combination of right place, right time. Does the relationship resonate? Does the person you're talking to actually have an interest in really understanding your business? I'm going to tell you right now, there's a few carriers that we work with at Greif that the people I talk to know more about our network
Yeah.
and packaging than I do. And I'm like,
Yeah.
again, that's how you get there is beyond transactional, make yourself sticky and harder to replace. And same thing for, I guess, new carriers is finding that, that relationship.
Yeah, I love that. And honestly, I always said like, you know, if I'm in sales and it's really hard to get into a company, that means once you get into working with them, like it's hard to get out, right? Like it means that they take their relationships seriously.
Yeah,
So
no, I love that one because it's like if you were an incumbent, you'd be like, stop answering your phone for cold calls, and when you're not an incumbent, you're like, uh, you know,
yeah.
cancel your award with your incumbent and give it to me. So right, yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, I know. I I just had a broker. I guess no, it was a. I think it was like yeah, it was a broker. There was a post on LinkedIn, and they said that shipper sent out an RFP. Somehow, classic mistake, didn't BCC recipients, and there was 376 brokers on the RFP. And this person was like, "I just responded and said, please remove me from
That's
this."
a bold strategy. Yeah, and also I would argue too that's kind of like that's similar to like commercial real estate. I think like if you do an RFP and you send it to everyone in the world, all of a sudden you have this building. I did some RFPs for warehouse space in the KC Metro, and if you send it to too many people and you're asking for 300,000 square feet, there's probably not a lot of buildings that fit that, and you just drove up your own rate. So same
Yeah.
thing in truckload. Yeah, just adding more brokers to the mix could backfire. Yeah, I know.
And I think the point that like too this gentleman was making was like, hey, how do you even like anyone who solicited you has a chance at this. So I think like we want to go where like our time is more valued. You're careful with who you're allowing to participate and who you're partnering with. And so I think it's such a like reciprocal industry, right? Like you're
Yeah,
going to get what you give, and you put emphasis on partnerships and value, and I think you get that back too. So
yeah, and being transparent too, I think is so important. I mean, the worst thing I think is someone that can't say no. I mean, just stringing people along or making them think they have a chance is just it's not fair, right? I think
yeah.
just if you do an RFP with Greif, you are going to get feedback and it's going to say, here's your award, you didn't get an award, things like that. And just
Yeah.
it's a lot. And we're asking a lot of people to spend a lot of time doing RFPs
Yeah.
and they might not win anything. So, it's something that you got to be cognizant of.
Absolutely. And for anyone who might be listening, that's maybe a broker, that's something that you know, in my past, I've practiced with carriers. Think how many brokers go out and solicit carriers for rates to help them in strategies, and then that's it. May never
Yeah.
hear anything again. So if you're going to, you know, partner with carriers to do RFP exercises, I just always felt like it was a common courtesy to let them know, hey, here's the feedback we got. We were 10% high with your rate. Da, da, da. I always did that. And I had a couple carriers, so we've never gotten feedback before. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, that sucks. Like, we need to do better as an industry to help each other. Because if we're not passing back the losses, or, if it's like, hey, you don't get something, you need to learn from that on all fronts. So that's awesome that you guys take the time to do that too. Many times as a provider, I didn't get any type of feedback other than no award. I was like, okay, unless you had to ask for it and go try to seek it out. So I think we all get better if we share information, even on the losses, if we can.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone listening has questions, this is the time we'd love to take some questions. If anyone's going to be brave enough to put some out there. Good morning, Chris. Thanks for listening. Chris is a fellow Royals fan, so
Oh, nice. Okay.
he can kind of sympathize with me this year, with us this year. So
it's still early. It's not even
still
summer
early,
yet.
right? That's a good. I like that. It's still early. I think if nobody's going to be brave enough to ask questions, I think you've ran me out of questions, Frank. But I have one last question actually for you. What's the best way that people could kind of connect with you? I think LinkedIn, you're pretty active there. If they want to kind of see what you're up to and keep track of what you have going on, maybe follow you on LinkedIn would be good.
Yeah, follow LinkedIn, connect on LinkedIn. That's cool. I think that's probably the easiest way.
Yeah. And he is here in Kansas City. So I saw him at our last KC Freight networking event. So if anyone is local to Kansas City and would like to be more involved in networking events, we are kind of trying to get that off the ground here, myself and some other Kansas City companies. So just shoot me a message on LinkedIn. We'd like to know who's out there that hasn't been included yet. And we'd be happy to get you guys included as we try to start making an effort to network more within our cities, our regional areas. Like Frank and I did such a great job of today by meeting in person for coffee when we're both in Kansas City.
Yeah, hey, that's all right. I was at that last event. It was great. So
yeah, it was.
I'd encourage anyone, if you're in the KC Metro, to attend, and I'll try to come to the next one also.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening in so much. If you guys listen back to this, even on like Spotify or Apple or YouTube or LinkedIn later, and you had a question that you would like to have asked, all you have to do is come back into this post on LinkedIn, which will be featured on my profile, and you can just leave a comment and tag us, tag myself or tag Frank, whoever the question's for. We'll see that, and we'd be happy to jump back in and respond when we get time on LinkedIn. So don't be afraid to ask questions after the fact. But Frank, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, enjoyed having you here. And everyone be sure to follow Frank on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. And if you haven't already, go give us a like or a rating on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever it is you guys like to listen back to podcasts on. Thanks everyone for meeting us for coffee.